the Within Orb podcast. Come get Within Orb. Hello, my name is Jenn Zahrt, and welcome to Within Orb, a production of the Celestial Arts Education Library, a podcast bringing people together around the love of astrology, books. Join me as I interview people about the astrology books that changed their life and practice. You can support the podcast at withinorb.com. So welcome, Thea, to Within Orb, the Celestial Arts Education Library's new podcast, and you are our very first guest.
Oh my God, I can't believe it. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you for coming, and I'd love to hear, actually, the very first book you ever read about astrology.
I know it was The Only Way to Learn Astrology, Volume 1.
Yeah.
Because I was 9 years old, and it was the first time I had that aha moment. And I was at my grandparents' house, and I think we had either just come from like a garage sale or someone got it from a garage sale. That's what I remember. And no one in my house had interest in astrology or like studied it seriously. And I don't know how that book got there, but it was supposed to be there for me. And I was like, look at all the stuff you can do. This is amazing. And
you were only 9.
Yeah. So like when I say read it, I mean, like I had it. And then when I went to college, I kept it with me my whole childhood. I'm a keeper collector person.
Cool.
And so then when I went to school, I like read it again. And that's when I was trying to, teach myself.
Yeah. You almost got it through osmosis just by having it in your sphere.
Yes. It's very synchronistic.
So then what was the second book about astrology you ever read?
The second book that I read was probably on the heavenly spheres. So then when I started studying with Sam Reynolds, that was the book that he recommended to me. And like, I still have it. It just really anchored everything in their tradition. And I could kind of put aside all the things that I had learned by osmosis and just, I think, switching from an enthusiast to like actually studying and applying.
Yeah, because the rules are in there.
Yeah.
So On the Heavenly Spheres is a textbook of traditional astrology.
Yes.
I call it the blue book because it's bright blue. Yeah, no, that's a great textbook. I'm happy Sam recommended that to you.
Yeah.
So if we get down to nuts and bolts, I'd love to know if you were on a desert island and you could only take 3 astrology books with you, what are the top 3 books that you would need that have influenced you?
I love that if I were on a desert island, I would be taking astrology books with me.
Oh, yeah. We don't need any other books. We're only taking astrology books. I mean, ephemeris aside, that's a given. Okay. Like we're going to.
Yeah. So once I have the ephemeris, the one that I reach for most often right now is the Firmicus Mathesis book, just because it's interesting because I was trying to think about my relationship to this book and how I use it, but maybe we'll get into that later. So I think that's number 1. Then number 2, I know you had a hand in this book too. Maybe I didn't give you a heads up, but obviously Valens.
Okay.
It's so nice to hold in my hand and not just be a PDF that I constantly search my desktop for. So
very cool.
That's fun. And then because hopefully on the desert island, I will be doing some operations to get off the island. I will bring copies, right?
Super smart. So you're holding a copy of the Picatrix, and that's a really great version of this book, actually, translated with an introduction by Dan Attrell and David Porrecca from the amazing series of books coming out from Pennsylvania State University Press. So This is the one that I actually got to know that this one existed from Nina Griffin.
Yes. And I worked with this, I think, in Austin's class. Before I had, I think, the Greer one that I worked with.
Very cool. Very cool. So that's the top 3.
I think so. I'm changeable. So if you ask me another day, it could change.
Okay. You get a bonus book besides the ephemeris. What's the 4th one you'd take if you could?
Oh, I get a bonus book. Okay. So then the bonus one would be Agrippa, 3 books of occult philosophy.
That is a huge book.
Yes. Right. And I think I would take it because I've had courses that have helped me get through this and work with it in the way that it should be worked with. I feel like you need someone to help shepherd you through.
Say more about that.
Well, so like, it's not a book that I like recommend to people unless you're in class. So studying with Nina Griffin, this is one of our source texts. And then from there, after working with it in class, there's like pitfalls. There are things that you kind of want to be guided through, test, or else you could have like major blowback, because what we're doing here is these are source texts that are operational focus and were written a long time ago or collected or what have you. And so it's just really nice to have some guardrails in before you dive in.
So if I were to say that in other words, it's as though reading it straight, just sitting down in a chair and deciding to read Agrippa is not going to be as helpful as having conversation around what's actually in it.
Yeah, it needs to be workshopped, tested, compared. I love hearing other people's opinions. I completely agree with that. Like, it's not a book that I sit down and enjoy reading.
Oh, no, poor Agrippa.
I enjoy I think I enjoy the discovery.
Yeah.
And so like, I hope we get to talk about that too. Like the sort of part that comes where you've integrated it and then you're like, oh, okay, this is how this fits for me today.
For sure. And I feel, let's just start with Agrippa. So when we look at what he actually did, Eric translated Agrippa from Latin freshly from that and compiled a bunch of sources. His footnotes are so big. Look at this. This is the latest one. We have it in the library here.
That's beautiful.
3 volumes, hardback. And the thing is, in speaking with Eric, it's like Agrippa didn't actually write a book. He compiled quotes from everything that he was swimming in at the time. And I think that's what makes it hard to read, because there's these compiled quotes.
And then up front, it's like, if you're going to be a sage and do sage work, you need to be like properly prepared. I kind of like laugh at how there's like this, things are occult, but like once you've studied, then you gain entry. It's sort of like there's initiation and having to take these seriously. But then like once you do it, you're in. And so it's almost like a club, I think sometimes, and how dense and compiled these are, or like sometimes I think, oh, that's a little pitfall, or like that's a little misleading, or maybe that was translated wrong. There's not like a reading and I can take that wholesale. There's like a reading and vetting part, which I think is always really enjoyable for me. Like I enjoy the vetting process. And sometimes it can feel like frustrating, or like I'm not just instantly gaining knowledge, but what I do feel like I'm gaining is an experience in how to like either decipher or navigate.
How do you recommend someone vet what they read in Agrippa, for example? How do you do it?
So usually I start out with like, what do I want to do? And so do I want to do lunar mansion work? Do I want to do planetary magic work? What is the thing? Sometimes I find myself like lately looking for really specific things that either I forgot and are there. So I think having, first of all, like a point of entry is really helpful, because then you can kind of put your blinders on. And then anything that sort of either bumps up against what you already know, I think it's always a good exercise to trust like, okay, this maybe got translated wrong. And sometimes you'll check the footnote and you'll see, or like, this seems like today in 2023, we have more source text available to us. And there are better ways to like do this operation. Say, for instance, the timing thing requires like, you know, you need the sun in Aries. And like back a couple of years ago when Saturn was in Capricorn and we had that square, it was like, no, we can't. So like figuring out, but maybe I can wait till the sun is in Leo and then do something there. Like trying to figure out, you know, there's the timing aspect that isn't always made clear. And so timing is also where you would want to like vet and figure out like, am I going to do something that's going to have major blowback? I mean, of course, the way to do that is in class. And then after you finish a class, you never stop doing that. Right.
Yeah. Have you tried to do something out of step with the advice given in Agrippa just to test it?
Yeah, I'm kind of for myself, I am a like F around and find out kind of person. You know, say for instance, like working with fixed stars or something like that. I think it was like last year I found like a great one for Sirius, but like Mars was opposing it. And I was like, can I try it? Can I try it? Is this going to be like, I actually don't remember if I did it. And I want to say I actually didn't, but I had a whole operation planned out. And then I just got a bad feeling. Okay. Like I'm not going to make something that captures this moment, even though it was a beautiful Sirius moment. Sirius, the fixed star.
I was about to say.
I know. So yes, there have been times for myself, I'm willing to experiment.
Yeah. I love that because it's almost like you're saying like, okay, it got passed down from the sages that we need to be paying attention to the moon not being in via combusta, but let's just see if that's still true, right? Like, what's the worst that can happen?
Especially with via combusta, like, let's see.
Well, the thing about that is the precession of the equinox, right? So the fixed stars that were behind the tropical zodiac at that time might have moved on. And so we have to readjust our via combusta tropical pathway.
Exactly.
Right?
And that echoes across too to lunar mansions. So I went through a whole thing where I was like, I think lunar mansions should be tropical zodiac, but I've also learned it, like, people are like, you need to adjust back to sidereal. So like, that's another experiment I've been doing for like.
Really? I had no idea. That's awesome.
Yeah, I compare.
And have you gotten anything so far?
It's been so spotty. Listen,
okay.
Now I feel like I need to delve into it further. It takes a lot of time, but for me, I do lunar mansions off the tropical zodiac and it works. Although I understand mansions are set by the constellation. Like, that's what we're talking about. It's like,
yeah, in terms of like the stacking of the spheres, right? Is that what you mean? Because the mansions are in like the outer shell of the cosmos.
But the lunar mansions themselves like have an origin that are fixed to the constellations. And so the tropical zodiac, yes, of course, it's like shifted. I mean, there's been astromagicians who are doing this work and they have different reasons. But like, for me, this is like one of the instances where I'm like, but what works now? And the only way that I know it is if I run it through the experience of testing it myself. Mm-hmm. And, like too, like the thing is, we've got outer planets. Like, what's happening when you like add a little dose of Neptune? Like, I can't unsee that Neptune is right there. Like,
that is a perfect word for Neptune too. Get a dose.
Just kind of like intoxicating.
What's the verb for Pluto, right? Like,
I don't know.
I know. That's awesome. But when you talk about the tropical zodiac being the tempo setter for your work with lunar mansions, I'm thinking about that Platonic cosmology that's got the Earth in the center and then the spheres, and then you get to that eighth sphere of the fixed stars, and then you get I read like then the lunar mansions are there on the outside, but the moon is on the inside, right? So that's not how I even think about like it being that far away. I don't know. There's like a different visual that conjures up my head when I work with lunar mansions. What is it?
It's kind of like the moon goes to a place and visits a spirit, because each of the lunar mansions have ruling spirits. And I feel like they each have a tone. So I started a project, abandoned it. Maybe I should actually finish it, where I started writing like hymns to the lunar mansion spirits.
Oh.
And once I started paying attention when the moon was in her zodiac, it's not a solar zodiac, it's the moon's zodiac, in other words. And then noticing like funny things would happen. Like, I'm not going to have the examples now, but like on a day where the moon was in a certain mansion that had to do with like toxins, I like got bit by like a hornet. Like, this is just like weird. And like, I don't know that I would have seen that if I was just paying to where the moon was according to like the 12 sign solar zodiac that we always use. Because I started paying attention, then like all these things happened. And I was like, I don't know, this also feels a little scary. Like, I don't want to start to like welcome these things. But then I would write, like, it would inspire me to write a little hymn of how we can get the best use out of it. Because the thing that I've noticed about, I know we're here to talk about books, but
no, this is awesome. I love it.
The thing that relates to like, I find with the lunar mansion spirits is like, I feel like we call on planets a lot, or like there's more people doing that now. But I feel like when you call the name of a lunar mansion spirit, it really does, you get this like, huh? Like this kind of like, it's louder or the more noticeable to that spirit is kind of how I imagine it. That's like my little visual for it. So I have like these little comfy layers where the moon travels to.
How would you categorize the Picatrix depiction of the lunar mansions versus what you get in Agrippa?
So when I go to the Picatrix, let's just open it up. It's more like it's filling it in for me. In the Picatrix, there's like 2 sections that are talking about lunar mansions. You get like what the mansion is called and where it begins and where it ends. And you can get like a certain meaning of what this is good for. So like the 3rd lunar mansion, which has like amazing properties, and the moon is about to get there soon because it's at the end of Aries and the beginning of Taurus, like up to 6 Taurus. So yeah, the moon's about to enter that. And it's really good for like growing things over time, works of alchemy. And so like I find myself going here when sometimes I'm confused. I don't know, the Picatrix just has a really good, it's like a reminder for me. Cause like I don't have these memorized.
Mm-hmm.
So I just go here. I mean, I know them. So that's in book 1, chapter 4. And then if you go to book 4, it just lists them all again. Mm-hmm. And it does tell you their spirit names and like more about what to do and how to invoke. So then it'll say like, the 3rd mansion has its names. This is the Pleiades. It's not anymore. And then say, oh, Annuncia, such and such. And so it's got more of like an operational bent within here.
Yeah. A seated woman holding her right hand above her head and dressed in clothes. Very important.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I've made that one. And I was like, oh, I think I might make that one again. I have a image talisman that I made during that operation that I've used for a couple of years. That's like really beautiful. Mm-hmm. But I actually also like what's kind of going on right now. Like Venus just entering Pisces.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ruling that when the moon gets to the Taurus part of this mansion, it's like really sweet. So for me, I think the lunar mansions are actually clear in the Picatrix.
Astrology in the 21st century is more exciting than it's been in centuries, with revival of ancient, classical, Renaissance, medieval, and 20th century techniques, all bringing 21st century astrology into the most powerful system ever seen. But where do you begin to learn how to practice such a powerful system? I'm Rod Suskin, a professional astrologer with over 30 years experience. Come learn with me at the Rod Suskin School of Astrology, an all-online 3-year diploma, intense, exciting, and stimulating. Learn how to marry the best of the ancient techniques with the most powerful modern techniques to give clients an accurate, insightful reading. Visit rodsuskin.com for more information.
I'm also hearing from you, like reading is one thing that's more of the sort of semi-initiation, but actually taking the time to like put the book down and do the work is really what gets you to know how to do the work in a way.
And matching it, to my lived experience. So like, if we were to give you an example, like when I'm talking about Firmicus, this is another book where there's like really fun things in here. Like in the beginning, he's talking about what kind of life an astrologer ought to have.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
That's awesome. I've only read the 8th book. So what kind of life does he say an astrologer should have?
Let's see. I can tell you. Oh, I got you. What sort of life and what sort of practices astrologers ought to have? And it's really short. And some of it's really archaic. Like you should have a wife and a home.
Everybody wife up.
I know, right? But what I do like about it, which I've flagged here now, nor should you join in conversations secretly with anyone, but openly, just as I said above, under the gaze of all, you should reveal the learning of this divine art. There's like little gems in there.
Awesome.
And it's really just like study hard and like be a good person. Don't use this knowledge for ill. Then there's like some things about like, if you're going to work with the emperor's destiny, like basically don't do it.
That's funny. I love the way in the back, that 8th book, just to connect to this text with you, there's all of these horoscopes just from reading the ascendant degree. So I looked it up for some of my friends and it's like, you're going to be an herbalist witch. And it's like, she is.
Yes. Yeah.
Some of them are super violent though.
Ascendant, like what term or bound it's in is like, also colors it in this way that like, I was rereading this again recently too. And I was like, oh yeah, that's such a nugget that like you forget.
Yeah. Oh, I love looking at bound rulers of the ascendant. The way I learned it from Bernadette Brady was it's the material manifestation of a thing. It's how something actually shows up in the world. So yeah, I didn't know that was in there.
Where I was going to go with this story, I think we were talking about like vetting. Yeah. So like, you can do that too with like your chart. Obviously, like I know astrologers do this and thinking about like how it's shown up for your life. The reason this is one of my favorite books is like I saw it operate really clearly in my life. There's these like planetary combos that Firmicus gets into. So for instance, Mars and Saturn together. And then it'll do Mars and Saturn, but depending, it could be a square, it can be a trine, it can be whatever the aspect is. So if you have that combination, and I learned this in Austin's class, like this is where I delved into this book. And we went over thinking about how these planetary combinations showed up in our lives. And I have Mars square Saturn in my chart by whole sign. So that's fun. And I was like, how does that show up for me? And like, one of the things is that the native will lose their inheritance or something really weird like that. And also like the mom will die young or like relatively young. I have to find it so I can read the quote.
Okay,
and
find it.
That's really fucking what happened to me. So my mom died young. She died young for her life and also for my life. So I was in my 20s. And through like a series of really unfortunate, weird things that happened, a lot of the possessions that she owned are just forever gone. They're gone. There's no getting them back. And it's really interesting because I sat with that and I was like, the thing that I always lost is like, there's photos and all the stuff she owned and things that were hers that I wish I like physically had, picture, like whatever it was that she kept. And seeing that show up in this like just really quick couple paragraph delineation was like mind blowing for me. And I actually had to sit with it for a couple months and be like, what does this mean? Yeah. And if I had read this before my mom's death, like I would have been freaked out. So obviously like really grateful that I read it when I was ready to. And also like, so then what do I do with this? And I think for me, like, there's lots of scary things in some of these traditional texts, but like the thing is that it can play out in like a way that fits your life now. Like I didn't lose a monetary inheritance. I lost something that was sentimental and that I never thought I would lose.
Right. Which actually makes the pain harder because you're thinking it's always going to be there and then it isn't. Yeah. Where are you with it now?
Like with Firmicus and
just the lived experience of seeing something be foretold, reading it after the fact with hindsight, and then now you're a transmitter of the tradition to people who come to you for consults, right?
Yeah. I think this is where like remediation comes into play and sitting with these difficult signatures. So that it's not really like a matter of this is really scary or I don't want this thing to happen with me. But like if I'm going to live Mars Saturn, like that there's things I can do from like a remedial standpoint that build a relationship with my Mars and build a relationship with my Saturn, depending on what, in that moment I'm willing to enter into a relationship to and like constantly dialogue with it. Yeah. And it's given me so much richness and so much context that there's a trust that I have in this art, not just from reading the words on the page, but from understanding the ways in which they played out and could have played out.
Yeah, that's a very fascinating line to toe between like appreciating the tradition through textuality, but having to marry that with mentors who are guiding through the text and then also lived experience of just time, paying attention to the movement of the moon, paying attention to the working you want to do, evaluating it. And that's not in a book,
Sometimes I wish it were. Yes.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I almost wonder, though, if it were in a book, if we would be able to really, truly read it and understand it. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Because you're transmitting embodied wisdom through having gone through these texts as an operator.
Yes. And I've also learned lots of things and read things. And I'm like, I don't know if this is for me to pick up right now. And I also feel like that's also okay. And I'm trying to think if I have a good example of that. But, like there's so many things that are now available to just like order and get. And that's not the same thing as sitting and earning wisdom from it.
Yeah.
Like I've done the same. Like I have books that I've ordered because I was like, I should read that. But either I'm not really called to right now, or I'll see it make the rounds and I'll get it, but I haven't actually read it yet.
I still think it's in your field though, and osmosis, it just kind of, I think it keeps the temperature. Like this room is filled with all of the books written by our astrological ancestors, and it is loud in here. Like,
oh my God, I bet. I love that word, astrological ancestors. Yeah. It's beautiful.
And there's so many, it's like no one has enough lifetime left to read them all.
I know.
So if you were going to give a reading list to someone just starting, what would you tell them to pick up first?
I love the way that Demetra George writes. Like, I love the way that she explains astrology. So if someone wants to enter the field and like start talking about their friends' charts to them and maybe start embarking on readings, I feel like the one that she has Oh yeah, astrology and the authentic self. I love that one because it's like at that point, you know what the planets are. And usually there's that point where you gather all the information and say they're just starting out and they want to sort of synthesize, but you find that like it scatters as soon as you start to bring it all together. I find that that book is really good for that. And like in terms of like what to prioritize.
Yeah. What would be your next recommendation for them?
I mean, I love 36 Secrets, Susie Chang's book. I found myself going to this often just because this is astrology and then tarot and the decans. So I go to this one a lot because I think it's nice to have visuals. Like you can anchor what parts of the zodiac look like and how they show up in the tarot archetypes. That's also really helpful for someone starting out to get like a sort of visual conjured image of what are we even talking about here?
Very cool. Very cool. When you're making your images, do you do the art yourself?
I do.
Awesome.
Yeah, I've really learned not to judge it and like to just have fun in the experience of making something. I'm not the best by hand drawer, but I do love collaging. Like I've loved that since I was a little girl. I used to have like stacks of magazines and make images. And I do that even from time to time when I'm bored. So like that's always a fun way for me to put together almost like a symbolic representation of what I think it looks like. And once I let it go that it had to look like the thing, it was a lot more fun.
Very cool. Do you think the working also guides you with that in a way? Like you're like engaging something that's a little bit outside of your capacity to be in control?
Yeah, that is a part of what we're doing here is like sitting with the energies and then making the thing at the moment and just like not judging it, but it's beautiful because you made it, you know, you gave it a little physical home. Yeah.
Are these images that you've made going to stay private, or do you think you might share them at some point?
They're probably private for now. But what I do sometimes feel called to do is like take a picture of my altar, because that to me is that's like the whole presentation. And so I have so much fun, like buying the right color candles and making candles like from beeswax and like doing the dipping. So it's like getting the right kind of flowers, correspondences, or like I like creating the whole thing. And like I have like, even since I was a kid, I would like ask my mom to be like, can we do a seance? And she would take me to go buy candles and like glitter for the table. And it's like that same kind of working energy that I love and I really relate to.
Very cool.
I should share more photos though.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in going back to Agrippa, he articulates that the things that the planets like aren't just a matter of correspondence, but that they're actually like the earthly manifestation of the planet itself. Like if you cut yourself, that's literally Mars on your hand. And if you eat a piece of garlic, you're like chewing Mars. So in a way, like going through this ceremonial presentation and gathering is actually like you're meeting them like tangibly.
Yes, because that's the only way we can engage in this reality, like is to create a little sphere of what this would look like down on Earth. I love that. And then sometimes there's like cute things that I do, like even like today's Venus Day and I'm wearing green, or like sometimes I'm like, I need a little energy and I'll get my nails done like bright red. And sometimes I'm like, this is how I'm showing up for this planet. And I kind of sense that I need that. Or like adding lemon water because it's deep winter and we're in Aquarius season. So like adding lemon to my water has been like
literally drinking the sun.
I'm trying. If the sun doesn't want to come out, I will drink it.
I love it. So you're like living planets. They're in your cohort.
Yeah. You know, I find myself too, like even in my household, I do a lot of the cooking and the shopping. And it's like on Tuesdays, like maybe I'll make the red meat. We'll eat an animal. On Monday, maybe we'll just go meatless and have like a lot of cheese and dairy. Like there's a way that I probably do too much, but it's fun. I don't know. It can make the mundane magical. It's just like always what I'm returning to, I think. And then that way too, if I'm reading or I'm learning about an operation, you know, I'm not just doing it one time because I need something. I'm like carrying this through like a daily lived experience. How you're saying like that thing is the planet. It's not just like a correspondence.
Yeah. Well, and it's good to avoid transactional relationships, right? Like, I mean, I can feel it. I didn't even think about green, but yes, it is Friday. And like, here you are wearing green, like you bring in Venus to the table, you know?
I hope so.
So you've brought up Maternus's Mathesis and Valens' Anthology, but those seem like kind of diametrical. Like they're not quite the same vantage point on Hellenistic. So could you say more about your take on how they present that era of astrology differently?
I entered Valens because of zodiacal releasing. And so I think I entered them for different reasons. For me, like I don't read these books from start to finish. I read them in different order. So they kind of live in my head as sort of like a mixed collection if I'm working with them at the same time, which I kind of have been. And then like Valens, again, like I feel like that PDF that everyone worked with for so long, it was really like, what do I need and what do I enter with to get the most out of? Mm-hmm. So to be honest, like these are my favorite books because I feel like I can go through, enter and get something really sound about whatever it is I need, but then I kind of back out. For me, like to read them from start to finish is different. Like I would maybe do like a Demetra George if I wanted to be like guided through. Because I think it is hard to like read this whole thing and digest it and make meaning of it. It's been an easier experience to read in context of like topic by topic than I would recommend. This is volume 1. I don't have her volume 2 yet, but
that goes back to what you were saying in the beginning of, reading these works that you've chosen in the context of a class or some kind of person who can guide you to get to that aphorism and unpack it in a way, because it isn't meant to be read start to finish, actually. You're sort of like, hey, what do you think about this? And, Firmicus Maternus is like, that's what you get for that planetary combo. And then you kind of move on.
Yeah. And sometimes I find myself frustrated a little bit, to be honest. I'm like, oh, but there's more. Like, there's probably more. And so like, where is the more is also where I'm interested.
Like the things they're not saying?
Yeah. And then like the more for me in terms of like, so then you can back out and go into other texts and link those together. And that's what you're saying, like this whole art takes like, it could be like several lifetimes. And I would love to have those lifetimes.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I think we get it in community though, because, you cover certain ground with your work and others cover other ground. And the conversations like this, we're sharing and sort of expanding our knowledge base together.
I was thinking about this too, because we're sitting down and having a podcast and I was like, oh my God, I learned so much from like when my daughter was born, like pushing her in the stroller and putting in a podcast or audiobooks or something like that. Like I didn't have the capacity to sit down and read all the time, but that learning also happened in that way too. And like where we are today in 2023, it's like people may enter through an episode like this and then be inspired to like go get the book, which is freaking awesome.
Yeah.
And it makes me really excited about like all the techniques that we have and like actually how they can be deepened.
What are some of your favorite techniques to use that you kind of put in practice more often than not?
I go to zodiacal releasing. Also too, I appreciate Valens. I felt a connection. I felt like ZR was really hitting for me. And I could see it show up in clients' charts in a way that like, I think it is a sort of a, what do you naturally gravitate and how is it filtered through you? So I've seen some people be able to be like, this is hitting. And then some people be like, absolutely not. But I really enjoy it as like, even after the session is done, to continue to follow a timeline. And I find that so beautiful that we can have these sort of like, these times within times.
That's a nice way of putting it. The nested periods.
Yeah. What are some other so I took horary last year at SDA, like even though I had learned it before and had been practicing it, but that also helped to further like my relationship to astrology just outside of natal, and to be like every single time I'm just blown away. But there's all these rules, and I'm not necessarily like a rules person, but like that then there's like beauty in the rules, and that's not a technique that's a branch of astrology, but I feel like we should just mention horary because it's fun.
Yeah, no, I think if you are only coming at astrology from a modern standpoint and you meet horary, it's like, whoa.
I know. And then sometimes I'm like, man, like if we had this rigorous of a practice that was able to continue along all the like periods in history where there's like religious persecution and things being watered down and texts being lost, like if we could have had this, like where would we be for so many centuries? It's really phenomenal. But in terms of like what other techniques do I bring to the table? I guess I don't always think about it in terms of technique. I just sit down and I'll see what strikes me first. But I mean, I do what everyone does, probably like, perfections and time period, like what lords, like all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. But it's nice to hear the sort of heat-seeking missile vibe with a chart. Like you look at a chart and you're like, well, we're going to talk about that.
Yes.
It's like it's telling you like, this is the topic, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's coming up now.
Very cool. Well, thank you for spending the afternoon with me.
This is fun.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jen.
Yeah. And if you ever want to come back, you're always welcome to talk more books and more everything astrology.
I love it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. See you again.
See you.
Thank you for listening to Within Orb. To learn more about the Celestial Arts Education Library, or to become a member, visit our website at CAELi.institute. That's www.caeli.institute. If you enjoyed this episode, please help spread the word. Follow or subscribe to Within Orb in your podcatcher of choice, rate it 5 stars, or write us a happy review. This helps others find the show. We also want to give a big thanks to the indie band The E-Block for contributing their song Wake Up for our intro and outro music. You can find them at their website, eblockband.com. This is Jenn Zahrt, signing off for now. See you next time.